I'm live. I've never been live before. I don't think I know how to be live. Well, hello everybody that's tuning in. I've never done a YouTube live before, so Lizzie, thanks for having me on this. I'm learning as we go. I was just messaging Lizzie frantically over WhatsApp, even though it's the middle of the night for her, saying, hey, help, how do I get everything going? But here we are. So my name is Forrest Galante. I'm a wildlife biologist. I'm the host of Animal Planet's Extinct or Alive. And what I do for a living is travel the world in search of evidence that animals that we believe have been declared extinct, or animals that we believe are extinct, are actually still there. And what I'm going to do today is talk through the process of extinction, the process of why a creature becomes extinct, why we're having such a massive rate of extinction currently, and why that name, that label of extinction, is not always as definitive as we think it is. So I'm just going to get started. First, a little bit of background about me. And feel free to ask any questions while you're tuning in. Any questions you have, I'll try and get to. I can see there's a little pop-up thing on the side, so I'll be keeping an eye out. So what I do is I'm a biologist, and I got a background in the wildlife sciences. And ever since I was a little boy, I was incredibly fascinated by the super rare, the super unusual, the one-offs. So much so that when I was very young, 12 years old, with Rhodes Scholar Brian Gratwick, we actually named a new species of catfish in the Zambezi River. When I was in college, I redefined the distribution of a coachwhip snake, a California coachwhip, over 100 miles outside of where they had previously been known to occur. So I'd always just been fascinated with searching for these really rare, really unusual species. And this kind of all led through field work in biology and wildlife sciences to where I am today, which is working for Discovery and Animal Planet and traveling the world to search for these animals. Now, I want to dig into extinction a little bit while I have you guys here. So extinction is an interesting topic. What happens is we have all these species around the world, millions and millions of species. And if we go more than 30 years without seeing one, then what we do is declare it extinct. Now, who is seeing them? Seeing one is a funny term, right? Because who's seeing them, right? A bunch of Western scientists declaring whether or not an animal is still there is really not a fair label for whether that creature still exists. And what I mean by that is, if you look at some of the places that I've worked with wildlife, for instance, Fernandina Island, super remote island in the Galapagos where we found the tortoise that was the cover picture for this chat. That tortoise, that species, hadn't been seen in 114 years. Well, no one was looking, right? It's this remote, rocky, volcanic island with terrible conditions. And no one had been taking expeditions there to look for the tortoise. There had been a couple small-scale expeditions, one in the 60s, one in 2013, but they hadn't turned up any results. So ours was the first ever large-scale expedition to look for this animal. However, it had been presumed extinct for 114 years because no one had seen one. So what I don't want to do is downplay the severity of extinction, right? We are in the sixth extinction crisis right now globally. We are losing species at a rate of around 2,000 per year, which is way quicker than we should be losing species. So extinction is very severe. But once we label something extinct, what we do is give up all hope for it entirely. All funding dries up, all scientific research for that animal dries up. And so you have to be 100% sure whether something is extinct before you give it that label. And to be honest, that's pretty much impossible. It's a big world and there's a lot of places to hide. So it's hard to say that something's extinct. So before we start getting deeper down the rabbit hole of extinction and the processes at which myself and other scientists go through to look for these extinct animals, I just want to suggest to people that are out there a really good book that might be worth reading while we are all sitting here, in quarantine. So The Sixth Extinction, here it is right here. It was a New York Times bestseller. It's an absolutely fantastic book by Elizabeth Colbert. For anybody that's interested in extinction, this book goes into the finite details of why we are in a sixth mass extinction and why that's a problem. Now, oftentimes in my field, I hear a lot of really stupid commentary along the lines of, why does extinction matter? Animals have always gone extinct in the past. Humans are just speeding up the process. It doesn't matter. really, 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 really ignorant questions like that this book does a fantastic job of answering. So I'm a field biologist. I'm a wildlife tracker and an animal science expert. I am not truly an extinction expert. However, Elizabeth Colbert, the woman who wrote this book, is. And I don't even hold a feather to the knowledge that's in this book. So I really suggest anybody that's looking for some good reading material, take a look at this. I've got some questions coming in right now, so I'm going to answer a couple of these questions, and then we'll go into the process at which we find animals extinct. So Andrea Menz, you're very welcome. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much. Emily D, what sort of species are we losing in the main? I'm not really sure what you mean by that, but I said it a minute ago. I'll just say it again. We're losing species at a rate of around 2,000 per year. So a really, really fast rate. And in many cases, like in the Amazon and Australia, where there's big fires breaking out, we're losing species before we even know that they exist. And this is, of course, very, very problematic for multiple reasons. One, for our own understanding and education. But two, some of the species we're losing are plants and insects and animals that could contain the cure for cancer, the cure for common diseases, colds, viruses, things like that we haven't even had a chance to study yet. So we really don't want to wipe out species at such an incredible rate. Now, how it's broken up between groups of mammals versus reptiles versus plants versus birds, I'd have to look at that. It's constantly shifting, but we are losing birds and amphibians and plants at the fastest rate currently. Two questions that have come in from Instagram. What animals do you believe to still be out there that are currently listed as extinct? That's a fun question. We'll get to that in a minute. And how do you go about finding these species? Well, that's really what I want to get into, is how I go about finding these species. Because it's a question I get asked all the time. Like, I want to be a biologist. I want to look for rare and exotic species. I want to look for animals deemed extinct that I think are still out there. How do I do it? And that's really what I'd like to dig into in this lesson. So I'll get to that in just a second here. With regards to the first question from Instagram, what animals do I believe are still out there? I have a list of 1,600 species approximately and growing that all have some kind of evidence that the animal believed extinct could still be out there. Now, some of these animals are listed as critically endangered. Some of them are unlisted because nobody's taken the time to conduct science on them in, basically the last 10 generations or ever really. But I have a list of over 1,600 animals that my group and I are targeting. And the way that we categorize that, just for anybody that's interested, is of the 1,600 creatures that we have, it's ranked, right? And the more data we get, the more information we get, the more it moves up in that ranking. And the less we hear about it, and I have a team of researchers that works with me. I don't know if any of them are listening right now, but they're absolutely wonderful people. They will get information all the time. Information from people like you guys that are watching this. People will actually send me stuff on Facebook, Instagram, email, my website, and be like, hey, take this with a grain of salt or don't, but I have seen this thing here. Or my buddy told me my aunt's sister's uncle's friend's cousin once heard this animal here. And, you have to weigh all of that information, but please know, anybody that sends me messages with sighting reports or information, we actually look at every single one of those and do catalog them all. So there's answer number two. Massive shout out to everyone at Bowden Health Academy. I'm not sure where that is, but shout out to them from Thomas Harling. Why is extinction happening? That's a good question. It seems self-explanatory, but it may not be. Why is extinction happening? Well, there's 8 billion something people on this planet, and we are taking over a lot of space, right? We need space for agriculture. We need space for farming livestock. We need space for our cities and our houses and our farms and our towns. And on top of that, a lot of the 8 billion people like to habitat. And when you combine all of these factors, when you get 8 billion people putting pressure on the Earth's ecosystem, it starts to take effect. Now with the pandemic, which has come from wildlife, we are vectors to spread all kinds of diseases that are leading to extinction because in global warming, all of these things combined, which increases the rate of species loss. Thank you for sharing your time. Have you started looking for the quagga? Ari, that's a really good question. So I have been communicating with the Quagga Project, which is a fantastic organization in my mind. And they're one of the first organizations in the world to be actively working on reintroducing a previously lost species. And what I mean by that is the Quagga Project has taken that they can selectively breed for the quagga aesthetic. And they are working to breed quaggas and reintroduce them in the wild. So that's something that I hope to actually feature on my show. Shh, don't tell Discovery. But it's something that I actually hope to go down there and work with, because I think the reintroduction of a previously extinct species is absolutely fascinating. When are you going back to look for the thylacine? Always. So far I've spent over 3 months in the bush of Tasmania and Australia collectively, looking for thylacine, and my next expedition will be taking me to Papua New Guinea for another month-long expedition. Can't say when that is, given the current. Hey, Forrest, I'm Jay. My mother sent you the video of that Rocky Mountain wolf. How's Fern the tortoise doing? Jay, thank you so much. Like I said, I catalog every single sighting. I really appreciate the video that your mom sent. Fern is doing really well. So for anybody that's tuning in that doesn't know this, Fern is the tortoise that we found on Fernandina Island after 114 years of presumed extinction, the only species of Chelonoidus fantasticus on Earth, the only specimen, rather. And the second one ever found, the first one was found 114 years ago in a male. And when we found her, she was completely trapped in this basically lava ball. It was sharp shards of lava all around a little pocket of green vegetation. And she was trapped there basically by lava flows, and she was emaciated and dehydrated. So she has now been taken into the Fossil Breeding Center, the same place that kept Lonesome George, which is a fantastic facility on Santa Cruz Island, the Galapagos. And she put on like 16 pounds. She's hydrated. She's healthy. I mean, she's doing really, really well. And there are ongoing efforts to locate a male. And they found evidence, the group that I was working with down there, that there are more tortoises on the island. So our initial work has sparked all kinds of return efforts, funding, conservation, and I have very, very high expectations for the return of the Fernandina Island tortoise. Many questions coming in. Wow. Okay. What was your favorite species to work with? Good question. My favorite species that I've ever worked with, not really a species, but on a whole, are probably crocodilians. I just love crocodilians. I love working with caiman in the Amazon, Nile crocodiles in Southern Africa. I literally just got evacuated from a shoot in Indonesia where I was working with a crocodile, a saltwater crocodile, and then got evacuated due to the travel restrictions, and I'm now home doing lives. But yeah, I love working with crocodilians. Something about how kind of perfect they are in their own niche, how little they've changed over evolutionary time, how intimidating they are, how cryptic they are, how intelligent they are, how beautiful they are. I just love working with crocodilians. And the number one animal on my bucket list to work with is the gharial. And if you don't know what a gharial is, it's an incredible crocodilian from India with a long snout and a big bulbous thing on the end, which they actually call the gharial, which means upside down pot in the native language there. Very, very cool animal. What else do we have here? Do you have any suggestions to get rid of the cane toad problem in Australia? I do. So Buddy Brantley asked, do I have any suggestions to get rid of the cane toad problem in Australia? So for those that don't know, cane toads are a big toad from Central America that were brought into Australia to eat cane beetles in the sugarcane plantations. They now run rampant, and they are really problematic invasive species in Australia because all the native fauna eat them, and they have toxic glands behind their eyeballs that, when ingested, kill the native fauna that are not used to eating them. So if you go to like Cape York, if you go up into Cairns and you go out on a misty night, they are all over the roads. I mean, there's thousands of them. I'll say this about getting rid of them. Do not bring in more biocontrols. Do not bring in these other animals from outside of Australia to combat these animals. We're actually, for the first time, starting to see an uptick in certain populations of species that live in that region who are learning not to consume cane toads, because over generational time, you know, they've seen their siblings die, they've seen their mom or dad die from eating cane toads, and now animals are actually getting smarter and staying away from cane toads in Australia, which is fantastic. One potential biocontrol, they're doing the same thing with fruit flies there's invasive Italian fruit flies over Los Angeles. So airplanes fly over and they dump millions and millions of sterile fruit flies. Good biocontrol to reduce the population, because with fruit flies, they mate and then they die. Cane toads are a little bit different, but that idea of sterilizing them to reduce their numbers is a pretty good one. So that's an option. Guys, the questions are coming in so fast. I want to get to the main point of one of the questions, which is how do I go about finding these species, and the topic that I wanted to cover today. So keep sending your questions. I'll revisit these towards the end of the chit chat, but I want to talk about how I go about finding extinct animals, because that was the question that I get the most, and that I think is what everybody's tuned in to hear about. So Let me begin by telling you that looking for an extinct animal is not easy. We have this big database that I talked about earlier, 1,600-ish animals that we believe could still be out there that are believed to be extinct. And we log all of the information, but we have to go through a checklist of variables before we launch an expedition, right? And that checklist includes things like, is there enough habitat? Is there enough food or prey source? Is there enough shelter for the animal? When was the last time the animal was seen? Who reported the sighting? When was it declared extinct? Why was it declared extinct? Are there other species that are dependent on that species that are still in the region? And the list goes on and on. There's this whole checklist. And obviously that changes, right? Because a reptile's answers are going to be very different to a mammal's answers, which again are going to be very different to a bird's answers. So it's a very dynamic system in which we meet this checklist of variables. And long story short, if we take this checklist and we go, oh my, on the ground, are there reported sightings, right? Just because nobody has seen this animal in 30 years doesn't mean, nobody is meaning like Western scientists. What about locals on the ground who would not even know whether or not the rarity of this species is a subject matter to the rest of the world? So we start trying to dig in. And a lot of the time that means me or a scout on my team has to go to some remote village in the middle of nowhere and try and interview people and show pictures of this thing and get information. And sometimes that information is yes, I've seen it. And 99% of the time that information is no, my granddad had a story about one or something along those lines. So once we start to gather all this intel, then we launch a full-scale expedition. But a full-scale expedition is still months of preparation. There are permits involved with that. There's funding involved in that. I have to go to my financiers and say, hey, will you guys fund me to go and look for this thing? There's the tools, right? So we built specialty tools, whether it's our trail cameras or our hex suits, or in the case of crocodilians, it's nooses, or in the case of certain mammals, it's scented baits. We have to go through such a lot of prep work to get ready to actually get on the airplane. And then when we get on the airplane, this is the fun part, and we actually land and drive and boat and submarine and motorcycle and hike and everything else to get to the habitat where we think we might actually have a shot at finding this thing, it usually all goes tits up. And what I mean by that is usually we get there and we're like, oh, none of the things that we accounted for or had planned for are going to go the way that we expected. Camp's not ready. The motorcycles don't have any fuel. One of the permits didn't come through, etc. So we then have to be dynamic. We go, okay, well, we're here for the animal. So you go work on the permits and you go work on that. I didn't realize there was a 3,000-foot mountain to get over. I'm going to start hiking up that with my immediate team and the bare essentials. And obviously this is, one specific example, but this is the case everywhere we go. It's always different in the field to what you envision it being in your head before you get there. A perfect example of that is if anybody on this chat had ever seen my Borneo episode, right? We knew there was a research station. We had great intel that the Miller's grizzled langur was in the region. We felt really confident we might have a shot at finding it. But when we got there, we realized the research station was just basically, a wooden stilted hut. And that, you want to talk about inconveniences, we were there in the middle of an insane bee breeding season where we were averaging 45 bee stings a day. Now, thank God nobody on my team is allergic to bees, but had they been, it would have been devastating. Someone absolutely would have gone into anaphylactic shock. And you see it in the episode, my neck swollen out to here and my one cameraman's eyes swollen shut, and we're just riddled in bee stings. But these are things that even when we're prepping everything, you don't account for. So then when we get in the field, and we overcome these obstacles of, lack of understanding before we get there because it's never what you expect is going to be, then we have to be dynamic in what we're planning on doing. So we have a drawn out plan, right? Like a game plan that basically says, all right, days 1 through 3, we're trying this. Days 3 through 7, we're trying this. 7 through 14, this. 14 through 21, this, etc. And, it's 1 through 3, it's set trail camera, or 1 through 3, scout. 3 through 5, set trail cameras. 5 through 7, blah, blah, blah. And it depends on the species, right? So we build customized plans for the animals we're looking for. But when we get there and we find out all these hurdles, then we have to get over all these hurdles. We have to get over all of these hurdles, and then we start acting on instinct. And what I mean by that is that's where I really draw the line as a scientist. And someone who's just got an instinctual belief and faith in what I do. And scientific protocol would say, all right, great, we're in the habitat. You draw a grid, right? And then you set a trail camera every square mile or every half square mile or whatever, right? And that's how you do it. Well, you get there and you realize you can't do that because part of that habitat is sheer vertical cliff. Some of it's underwater. Like, you can't follow the perfect scientific protocol for camera trapping in that area. And you've only got limited time and, say, 30 trail cameras. So instead, you have to try and rely on instinct. Where are the game trails? Where are the food sources? Where are the water sources? If we position a game camera in that area, which way is the animal going to approach from? Which way is it going to leave from? These are the instinctual parts of it that then have to actually outweigh the scientific procedure so that we make selected decisions that are going to optimize our chances of success. Of course, this still doesn't always pan out, right? We're looking for an extinct animal. Your odds of winning the lottery are 1,000 times greater than your odds of finding an extinct animal. I mean, we have basically found 5 extinct animals in total. Some presumed extinct, some declared extinct, etc. And the odds of ever finding one were infinitely small. Extinct means gone, right? It means wiped off the face of this earth. So the odds were always really, really slim, but we've been successful a number of times. So what you cannot do is let that get discouraged. When you get there, you trust your instinct, you do all these things that you think are right, and sometimes you're wrong, and that's just part of it, right? But is it a failure? I don't believe so, because we've learned so much along the process. We've learned about the habitat, we've learned about the remaining species in that environment, how things have filled certain ecological niches and roles, and honestly, it's just a really good thing to understand on the big scale. So I don't really consider any failures. Some expeditions we've cut short because it just seemed like it was absolutely hopeless. A perfect example of that is the great auk in the Faroe Islands. Do not believe that animal is at least in that region. So, we didn't actually cut the expedition short, but we left on time. But often we extend the expedition, pardon me, guys, we extend the expedition far longer than intended because we feel like we're hot on the trail. So, yeah, that gives you a nutshell. And then at the end, right, we collect all the game cameras, we review all the details of what we've learned, and we look at, is there a return plan, right? If we go back to Australia to look for the thylacine a third time, whether that's in Tasmania, mainland, or even Papua New Guinea, what are we going to do differently? What did we learn from this experience, and how does it help move us forward? And that's really important for my team and I to sit down and debrief at the end of every expedition to figure out what things we did right, what things we did wrong, and apply them to the next expedition. And I think that is what has made us, kind of given us the snowball effect of being successful more and more. It's taking the good and the bad, weighing them, learning from each expedition, and moving forward. I've now worked in 64 countries worldwide looking for rare wildlife. And when you've been to that many places, worked with that many animals, you start to learn certain tricks and tools that definitely work. So I won't say that I was an expert or the world's best at anything when I started this. I was just really, really passionate, driven, and motivated. And I'm getting to a point now where I consider myself very knowledgeable at the subject matter because I've been so many places and gone through so many experiences and tried so many different techniques. And honestly, it's a wonderful snowball effect. So anybody that's planning on working in the wildlife sciences, just remember that. You don't have to be the best, the greatest, the most knowledgeable when you start. Just learn the entire journey, right? Whether you're starting in your own backyard, digging up earthworms and keying them out in a field guide, or you're going to Africa to study the Serengeti. Just learn from every single experience and make sure that you apply that as you move forward. So I hope that sums up a little bit about how our process works. The final piece of that pie that I will put in is what happens afterwards, right? So like I said, most of the time we're unsuccessful. We are, after all, looking for an extinct animal. But sometimes, just sometimes, like with Fern, the Rio Apiporus caiman, the Pondicherry shark, the Miller's grizzled langur, etc., we are successful. And when we're successful, this is a wonderful thing. For instance, with the Zanzibar leopard, which I didn't mention in that last list because I was leaving it for number 5, once we were successful, it unlocked a whole lot of funding to help further conservation efforts and put out more game cameras and look for genetic analysis in Jozani National Park. And currently, with the Pondicherry shark, another species, where we found the animal, Yala National Park in Sri Lanka has no marine boundary for the national park, meaning the second you step onto the beach, you can fish, you can hunt, etc. But because we found this Pondicherry shark with Sri Lanka's leading scientists, who are incredible people, by the way, I didn't even get into how much I love collaborating with all the people in the field. But because I was with Sri Lanka's best marine scientists and myself, and collectively we found these pondicherries, now they're talking about extending the marine park 3 miles out into the ocean to effectively save the habitat for the pondicherry shark. So the expedition, the end of the expedition, is really just the beginning in some senses, especially for the wildlife and for its conservation and for the efforts that go in after that. I'm the hide and seek king. You know what I mean? I go in and I look for the thing and I find it. I am not the world's leading authority on conservation and wildlife management, right? The best people for that are the people that live in those countries, that are on the ground. They're the foot soldiers for the wildlife. And they're the people that once I find it or think are on it, we hand that information over to and say, here it is. Here's where we found it. Here's what it likes to eat. Here's where it likes to live. Protect it, right? We'll funnel resources, we'll funnel education and money into you. But now that you know this very important thing, this animal can be removed from the extinct species list, and now it can be preserved. So that's in a nutshell, start to finish, how looking for an extinct animal goes, all the way to like where we are with the Zanzibar leopard, the Pondicherry shark, and the Fernandina tortoise, where big, massive conservation efforts are now in place to protect those species, because years ago, sitting on my Excel spreadsheet was the scientific name of an animal that I wanted to go and look for. So that's the end of the processes. I'm going to answer a couple more questions, and then I'm going to sign off. So let me dig into a few of these questions that I didn't get to. Buddy says, as a senior in high school, do you have any internships on your crew? I love your work and I aspire to be a wildlife biologist. Buddy, first of all, thank you for your aspirations to be a wildlife biologist. The world needs more people like you. It needs more people, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here because I don't think anybody would be tuning into Lizzie's Facebook Live if you didn't already love wildlife and conservation. But the more people that work in it, the better. At this time, and I do appreciate all the messages I get, we're not taking on anybody more. We have a pretty small team. There's 6 of us in the field typically, and about 6 of us back at home typically, and that's it. Like, we don't really have the bandwidth for more people. But anybody watching, please, feel free to keep asking. If jobs open up, I'll let people know. But we're at full capacity for the time being. No internships or anything like that. Are you finding a new season of Extinct or Alive? Filming a new season of Extinct or Alive in Indonesia? From Peckelson, and I think I said Indonesia. I cannot say specifically what I was doing, but I will say that you're going to want to tune in on Earth Day to Discovery Channel, and that's about all I can say on that. It wasn't for Extinct or Alive. It was a very special wildlife rescue mission, and unfortunately, it was cut short because of the current global pandemic. So that kind of hurt me on that one. But I do intend to go back and finish up. More questions coming in. Have you ever been proven wrong by someone? Of course I've been proven wrong. I've been proven wrong more times than not. And what I mean by that is, most people that I deal with are naysayers. They say you're never going to find the animal. It's not out there. You're wasting your time. And most of the time they're right? I'm the one trying to prove everyone else wrong, not really the other way around. I don't think anybody has taken an animal that we found and proven it wrong. It doesn't really work that way. You know what I mean? You can't say this animal isn't here when we've seen it. But I've certainly been proven wrong plenty of times where I've had theories and they're completely wrong. So, I'm human like anyone else. I make lots of mistakes. And a lot of those are in the field. But like I said earlier, we learn from those mistakes and help further our work as wildlife scientists. More questions, guys, a couple more, and then I'm going to sign off and say thank you. Very good advice. Thank you, Andrea. You should determine the preferred depths in which the Pondicherry dwells and save the marine side of the national park, at least at extensions. Well, as I said before, that's exactly what we're working on. The Pondicherry shark is a small requiem coastal shark that likes inland waterways. So right up against the beach and into the mangroves and up into the rivers. Like bull sharks, they're anadromous. They go into freshwater and back into saltwater. So 3 miles will be plenty, because at 3 miles out from Sri Lanka, from that area, in most parts, it's very, very deep. So the fact that gill nets will no longer be allowed as choke points at river mouths, that in itself would basically effectively save the Pondicherry shark. So that's why we're doing that. Guys, this has been great. It's been wonderful. Lizzie, thank you for having me on your live stream. It's a pleasure to chat with people that care about wildlife and sciences and biology. I hope in this short amount of time I've been able to answer enough questions for everybody and that everybody has enjoyed it. I am very reachable on social media. If there's anything that I didn't get to, please send me a message. And otherwise, guys, stay safe, stay isolated, stay quarantined, and keep tuning in for more of Lizzie's live chats because they're great. Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure being here.